From the foregoing it may be concluded that evil is not caused except by good. For if the cause of any evil is evil, but evil does not work except by virtue of good, as has been proved, good itself must be the primary cause of evil. Still, what is not there is no reason, therefore every cause must be some being. But evil is not any being, as has been proved. Therefore evil cannot be the cause of anything. Therefore if evil is caused by something, it must be good. Again, whatever is properly and in itself the cause of something tends to its proper effect. Therefore, if evil were in itself the cause of something, it would tend to its own effect, that is, evil. But this is false, for it has been shown that every agent intends good. Evil, therefore, is not in itself the cause of anything, but only by accident. Now every cause by accident is reduced to a cause in itself. Now only good can be a cause in itself. But evil cannot be a cause in itself. Therefore evil was caused by good. In addition, every cause is either matter, or form, or agent, or end. But evil cannot be either matter or form, for it has been shown above that both being in actuality and being in potentiality are good. Similarly, there cannot be an agent, since each thing acts according to what it actually is and has a form, nor can it be an end, since it is without intention, as has been proved. Therefore evil cannot be the cause of anything. Therefore if something is the cause of evil, it must be caused by good. Now when evil and good are opposites, but one of the opposites cannot be the cause of the other, except by accident, just as it warms the cold, as is said in Physics 8, it follows that good cannot be the active cause of evil, except by accident. Now this accident in natural things can also be on the part of the agent, and from the side effect. Indeed, on the part of the agent, as when the agent suffers a deficiency of power, from which it follows that the action is defective and the effect deficient. As when the power of the digesting member is weak, there follows imperfect decoction and undigested humor, which are certain evils of nature. Now it happens to the agent, inasmuch as he is an agent, that he suffers a lack of virtue. For he does not act according to his lack of virtue, but according to what he has something of virtue. For if he were utterly destitute of virtue, he would not act at all. Thus, therefore, evil is caused accidentally on the part of the agent, inasmuch as the agent is deficient in virtue. For this reason it is said that evil does not have an efficient cause, but a deficient one, because evil does not follow from an active cause, except insofar as it is of deficient virtue. And according to this, it is not efficient. But it returns to the same thing if the lack of action and effect results from the lack of the instrument, or of any other thing required for the action of the agent, as when the motive power produces lameness because of the curvature of the pipe. For the agent acts both by virtue and by the instrument. On the part of effect, evil is caused by good by accident, and on the part of material effect, and also from the part of the form itself. For if the matter is unwilling to receive the impression of the agent, it is necessary that failure follow in the effect, as when monstrous births follow because of the indigestion of the matter. Nor is this imputed to any deficiency of the agent, if he does not transform disordered matter into a perfect act. For to each natural agent virtue is determined according to the measure of his nature, due to nature. On the part of the effect of form, evil happens by accident, inasmuch as form is necessarily joined to something by the privation of another form, so that at the same time as the generation of one thing, the corruption of another must necessarily follow. But this evil is not an evil effect intended by the agent, as is clear from the foregoing, but of another thing. Thus, therefore, in natural things it is clear that evil is only accidentally caused by good, and it happens in the same way and in artificial things. For art imitates nature in its operation, and similarly, sin is found in both. But in morals it seems to be otherwise, for moral vice does not seem to follow from a lack of virtue, since the weakness of moral virtue either completely removes the vice or at least diminishes it. For weakness does not deserve the punishment due to guilt, but rather mercy and forgiveness. For the defect of character must be voluntary, not necessary. If, however, it is carefully considered, it is found how much it is similar to something, and how much it is unlike something. It is indeed different insofar as moral vice is considered in action alone, and not in any effect produced. For moral virtues are not factive, but active. Now the arts are active, and for this reason it is said that sin occurs in them in the same way as in nature. Therefore moral evil is not considered from the matter or form of the effect, but only results from the agent. But in moral actions, 4 active principles are found in order. One of these is the executive power, that is, the motive power by which the members are moved to execute the command of the will. Whence this force is moved by the will, which is another principle. But the will is moved by the judgment of the apprehensive power, which judges whether this is good or evil, which are the objects of the will, moving the one to pursue, the other to flee. But the apprehensive force itself is moved by the thing apprehended. Therefore, the first active principle in moral actions is the thing apprehended, according to the apprehensive force. Thirdly, the will. The fourth is the motive force, which executes the rule of reason. Now the act of virtue presupposes moral good or evil. For external acts of this kind do not belong to morals except insofar as they are voluntary. Wherefore, if the act of the will be good, and the external act be called good, but evil, if the latter be evil. But nothing would belong to moral malice if the external act were deficient by a defect unrelated to the will. For lameness is not a defect of death, but of nature. Therefore, the lack of this kind of executive virtue either completely excuses or diminishes the moral defect. But the act by which a thing moves the apprehensive power is immune from the vice of death. For according to the natural order, it moves visible sight, and every object a passive power. Even the act of apprehensive virtue, considered in itself, lacks moral vice, since its lack either excuses or diminishes moral vice, as well as a lack of executive power. For both weakness and ignorance excuse sin or lessen it. It is therefore left that moral vice is first and principally to be found in an act of the will alone. Therefore, the root and origin of moral sin must be sought in the act of the will. But it seems difficult to achieve this inquiry, for when a deficient act results from the lack of an active principle, it is necessary to pre-understand the lack of will before the moral sin. Indeed, if this deficiency is natural, it is always inherent in the will. Therefore, the will always sin morally in acting, which the acts of the virtues show to be false. But if the deficiency is voluntary, it is already a moral sin, the cause of which will remain to be inquired into again, and thus reason will lead to infinity. It must therefore be said that a pre-existing defect in the will is not natural, so that it does not follow the will to sin in any act, nor even casual and fortuitous, for there would be no moral sin in us, for casuals are unpremeditated and out of reason. He is therefore voluntary. It is not, however, a moral sin, lest we be compelled to proceed ad infinitum. Indeed, the perfection of the virtue of every active principle depends on the superior active one. For the second agent acts through the virtue of the first agent. When, therefore, the second agent remains under the order of the first agent, he acts inefficiently, as is evident in the instrument when it fails of the motion of the agent. Now it has been said that in the order of moral actions, 2 principles precede the will. namely the apprehensive force, and the object apprehended, which is the end. But since everything that moves has its own motive corresponding to it, not every apprehensive force is the due motive of every appetite, but this of this, and that of that. Therefore, just as the sensitive appetite is the proper motive of the sensuous apprehensive power, so reason itself is the proper motive of the will. Again, since reason can grasp many goods and many ends, but each one should have its own end, and the end and first motive of the will be not just any good, but a certain determined good. When therefore the will tends to act, moved by the apprehension of the reason which represents its own good, the due action follows. But when the will bursts into action for the apprehension of the sensuous apprehension, or the reason itself represents some other good different from its proper good, moral sin follows in the action of the will. Therefore, in the will, the sin of action is preceded by a lack of order to reason and to his own end. For reason indeed, as when, upon a sudden apprehension of the senses, the will tends to the good that is pleasing according to the senses, but to the end due, as when reason arrives at some good by reasoning which is not, either now or in this way, good, and yet the will tends towards it as if it were its own good. Now this lack of order is voluntary, for it is in the power of the will itself to will and not to will. Likewise, it is in his power whether reason actually considers or refrains from considering, or that he considers this or that. And yet this deficiency is not a moral evil, for if reason considers nothing, or considers good at all, it is not yet a sin, so long as the will tends to an improper end, which is already an act of the will. Therefore, both in natural and moral matters, it is clear that evil is not caused by good, except by accident.